Hey everyone, my name is Brad Westfall, and I just want to talk to you about some things that we teach over here at React Training for useEffect, and specifically what goes into this dependency array and why. Does it feel like you're sometimes fighting it a little bit? Like sometimes functions go in there, sometimes they don't, and so that's what we're going to be talking about. So we've got this this little effect inside of our product profile. So over here, this is like our little demo project that we teach with, and if you go to, like, let's say a particular product, it loads up a product profile. So that's the component that we're looking at right here. Here's our side effect. We go and fetch the product, and then when we resolve, we set the state, and then of course if the product ID changes, then we need to refetch this information. So that's what happens when we kind of go like this and go between products. Okay, the product ID is changing because the URL is changing, and thanks to this custom hook from React Router use params, we can basically subscribe to the URL, and this will cause a re-render anytime the product ID changes. Okay, so that's great. All right, so we probably need to put in a cleanup in here, so that way we can kind of avoid some bugs and stuff. So this video is not really on that topic, but there's our cleanup. Now we've got our effect ready, and it's it's cleaning itself up. It's doesn't have a lot more work that I need to do to it. But this is where I get to the point in the workshop where I explain why it is that the product ID is the only thing that goes into the dependency array. So probably that you can rely on the linter to kind of fix this for you. And sometimes sometimes it feels like the linter is asking you to do things in here that you feel like shouldn't go in there, and sometimes it's asking you to put functions in there, and sometimes it's not, and it's kind of confusing at first, but there actually is some pretty good rationale, and the linter is usually right, and so try to follow the linter. Let's talk about why certain functions like this function and this function are not inside of our dependency array, and maybe sometimes they do go in our dependency array, and what the heck is useCallback, and how's that going to fix things for us? Okay, so let's start by just kind of going over some of the basics. We're going to take that out, and let's see, product ID is something that we close over, and it can change, right? So it's a variable that we use in here, so our side effect depends on this variable. We're closing over it, and it can change. So I usually just say this, I'll actually write this out in our workshop where I'll say any variable that we, I guess I should spell right for videos, variable that we close over, okay? Any variable that we close over that can change. And I always do this in the big capital letters like that, because that's like kind of the key part. So any variables that we close over that can change. And so you have to kind of understand a little bit more about closure than maybe you've had to do with other libraries and frameworks in JavaScript. So we're not going to talk about closure in detail, but just know that if there's any variables in here that we refer to that were made on the outside of our effect function, then that's closure. We're closing over those variables. So we've got some closure with, let's see, product ID is something we're closing over. We're not closing over is current because that was made on the inside, but product ID was made on the outside. What if product ID was something that came from props, like product ID came from props, and so now once again you can see that this is being required to put in our dependency array. Okay, what if product ID, what if it was a constant, like product ID equals 5 or something? Okay, so in all these cases we're closing over this variable still, but can it change? Well, in this case it can't change, and so if we take that out, notice the linter doesn't care for us to put that in there because it can't change. So it's if we close over it and it can change. That's basically the rule. Basic things like numbers and strings and booleans and stuff, those are pretty straightforward. What about functions though? So let's put product ID back in here. What about API products.getProduct? So that's just like my little way of doing like a little utility function to do like an XHR request. But get product is a function. I just happen to have it like tucked underneath this little single import thing. This is just something that I do personally, and it's a function. It's something that we close over, but it doesn't change. The linter looks at this code, it sees that we're using a function, which is a variable, and it's coming from an import, and that can't change, so it doesn't ask us to put that in the dependency array. What about setProduct? setProduct comes from useState, and it's also not asking for us to put that in the dependency array. So we'll discuss that one a little bit towards the end. But let's actually do some kind of experimentation and kind of see what we can do. Let's take this thing And I'm going to actually go up here and let's just kind of make like an imaginary like owner component that's owning the product profile. So return product profile like this. Okay, and we're going to say get product comes from this thing. So we're going to pass down get product. Now, technically, get product, that's not something that changes, just like before. But because it's being passed down as a prop, and this code right here is going to look here and see what things we close over that can change. Let's see what it does. Does it ask us to put I guess I got to put this right here, huh? Get product, like that. Okay, so in here, it is now asking us to put get product into the dependency array. So even though technically this get product is never going to change, I mean, when I say change, I mean that that this useEffect thing, it looks at this array and figures out if the variables have changed between our re-renders, and it's basically doing something just like a triple equals. So we're just kind of like comparing the function to the old one, and it's possibly changing. It's not actually changing, but the linter thinks it could change because it is coming in as a prop. Technically, the real algorithm here, I think, is using object.is, if you want to look that up, which is very, very similar to the triple equals. But when you compare objects to each other and functions to each other, they're only going to be equal to each other if their memory allocation is the exact same. So that point is going to come up here in just a second. So this thing is not changing, but the linter doesn't know that. It's not like the linter looks at this and goes and tries to find this owner and sees what we're actually passing down. Okay, that's not what the linter does, because in reality, this owner really is somewhere else in some other file. So what do you expect the linter to do? Like crawl around your entire code base and look for look for all the possible owners and be able to predict the future of everything that you're going to write for all of your owners and what you're passing down? It can't do that. All it knows is that this is a variable that can change, and so we're going to put that into our dependency array. Okay, so I guess you can make the argument that it doesn't change, and maybe you can take this thing out, and you could go right here and you could say, let's disable this line. I'm not a big fan of that kind of strategy, though, because you're eventually going to modify this code in some way where maybe there is a new variable that needs to go into this dependency array, but you're not going to necessarily know about it because you've disabled the linter rules. And we can work with this. We can put this thing in there and just like let the linter do its thing and put get product in there. Who cares if it's in there? Like, it's not going to be a reason why our side effect reruns, because again, it doesn't change. Okay, so why am I going on and on about this, like this whole change thing? Well, let's say we wanted to refactor some code. This is where things kind of get interesting. So this product ID, what if this was up here? And so when we call this function, which we got to call with a product ID, we're gonna do this, right? We're gonna say product ID. But now I'm calling that function right now and passing really a promise down, and that's not really what I want to do. I want to wrap this thing in this little arrow function, and so that way get product is now that arrow function. Okay, so get product doesn't really have any arguments, but when you call get product, it's now, like I said, it's now this arrow function. Well, this arrow function is going to change every single time app gets re-rendered. Like, let's say app renders 12 times for whatever reason. This is going to be a brand new function in JavaScript memory 12 times, which means this is going to be different 12 times, which means, and down here, by the way, I got to get rid of that product ID. So if we get rid of everything and we go like that, you can see that get product is now the only thing needed in here because our code can't see product ID, right? It's up here. So that means that if this changes 12 times and this changes, then now we're kind of like, doing the side effect too much. And so, this code down here, remember, this code doesn't the linter doesn't look in here to see what's going on. So this probably actually exists somewhere else. So the linter was asking you to put this in here because you gotta kind of like put your mind in the mindset of like how the linter, works. And the way the linter works is they're thinking you are hiding some sort of abstraction details underneath get product. We don't know what you're hiding in there, but you're hiding all kinds of variables in there possibly. We don't know what you're doing. It comes from some unknown place. So we can't possibly rerun our side effect based on the product ID changing because we don't even know that the product ID exists. But you might have product ID or a bunch of other variables inside of this thing, and we don't know what you got in there. So we're just going to make you put the whole function inside of your dependency array. And so let's say this is like what's actually going on. Now the implementation details of that function is only such that if the product ID changes, then we want to rerun our side effect. But this code down here doesn't really know that. So they're asking you to put the function in here for that reason. So what you're supposed to do is let's take this function and I'm just going to pull it out and assign it to a variable. So get product is equal to that. Now, if I go in here and I say get product, okay, nothing has really changed. I've just kind of moved things around. But again, if this gets re-rendered like 12 times, this is a brand new function 12 times, and we're running this side effect too much. So that's one problem. The other problem is, when do we actually want to rerun the side effect? We want to rerun it when the product ID changes, and we don't even have that knowledge down here. We don't even know that the product ID exists. So let's solve both of those problems with the exact same solution. If this function is changing too much, React has a thing called useCallback. And useCallback is a hook. So let's go up here and import it. It's useCallback. It's a hook where whatever function you pass in to here, they just return that function to here. So whatever I pass in there, they just give you that back here. But useCallback memoizes that function. In other words, they cache it. So if you were to have your app component re-rendered 12 times, and you're therefore passing in 12 different functions in here, what they actually do is they take the first function you ever passed in, and they just return that first function every single time. So therefore, you might be passing in a function that recreates itself like this thing. Okay, that arrow function is different every single time app renders, but the first one you ever passed in here, useCallback is just giving you back that first one every single time. So just by doing this, now getProduct is stable. In other words, its memory identity doesn't change between re-renders, and therefore this getProduct thing doesn't change. Therefore, we're not running our side effect too much. useCallback takes a second argument. It takes a dependency array, and this dependency array, its rules are the exact same as these rules down here. So we could just copy this up. It's basically looking for, inside of this code, anything that you close over that can change. Well, in this case, it's just product ID. So we're going to put product ID in here. We're going to let it do that for us just to show you that's what they want. Okay, so there's product ID, and now the end result of this is that if the product ID changes, then this useCallback thing will re-memoize this and give you a new copy of this function in memory. So the end result of this whole thing is that if app changes a bunch of times, but product ID doesn't change, well, then that means this will stay the same. That means this stays the same, and we never rerun our side effect, which is what we want. But if the product ID changes, if one of our renders is because the product ID changed, well, then that dependency array means that this causes us to give a new memoize function over here, and that means that is new, and therefore that is new. Therefore, we rerun our side effect because the product ID changed. This is how it was designed to work. So sometimes I tell people like you have to understand useCallback if you want to really understand useEffect. Now, not all of your useEffects are going to be this complex with all these different moving parts and stuff, but sometimes if you have a function that's going to end up in your dependency array, and that function can change, and so you put that in your dependency array and that function is changing, well, then you might rerun your side effect too much. And so useCallback is the tool where you can control how often that function changes and therefore control how often your side effect runs. Okay, so the next part, let's just kind of I don't know, like refactor this thing. Let's see, we'll put this back down here. Oops, this is going to be like that. This is going to be product ID, just to kind of like go back to what we had before. This thing goes back down here, and okay, so we don't have useCallback anymore. But what about this setProduct thing? Remember we talked about how that is something that's also a variable, right? Functions. This is a function assigned to a variable, and does it change? I mean, it seems like it would change, right? It's coming from a hook, and so that hook is going to return a function to us, which you would think would be changing every single time that product profile gets called. You call this function, they give you a new function. it should change, right? Well, it turns out that React actually guarantees the stability of this function that you get back from useState or useReducer. That's actually in the docs right now. I hope they keep that in the docs, that sentence, because I always go there for training purposes, and I show people that. And right now they're rewriting the docs. So Dan, if you're listening, I hope you keep that part because I like showing that. Okay, so they guarantee that that's not going to change. So the linter knows that it doesn't change, and therefore you don't have to put that in your dependency array. Okay, I guess we can get rid of that, right? What if we did something else though? What if we made like this imaginary owner thing, and then we return product profile, okay? And what if this state was lifted up to here? And what if we returned, or rather pass down the product, okay, product, and set product like this, okay, set product. So sometimes we do this, right? Sometimes we lift state up and we pass down the value in the setter. So right now this is product and set product. Okay, so I don't know if you noticed, but the very moment that I typed that, all of a sudden the linter is complaining. And what do they want? They want set product. And you're sitting there going like, but wait a second, like I know that that's stable and that it doesn't change. Well, remember, the linter doesn't know that. The linter doesn't know how this code was written, because that code is probably somewhere else anyways. Even if it's in the same file, the linter doesn't assume that this is the only possible owner of this code. In other words, there could be other components that are rendering a product profile and passing down something that is technically not stable. So from the linter standpoint, they're just going, hey, you've closed over a variable, set product. That is something that can change because it comes from props. And so we want you to put that in the dependency array. So I can see where this would be confusing to people, because some people like know that the set product or the set state function that you get from useState is supposed to be stable, and yet sometimes the linter wants you to put that into the dependency array. Well, it's because it comes from props in this case. So anyways, that's basically the rules. I mean, I could probably go on about much more complex examples, but just to make this video short, I hope I was able to kind of show you like when functions go into this dependency array. And I'll also post a link to an article I wrote about the same exact topic. So useCallback can really help you out sometimes. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. In this case, we don't need useCallback because set product has already been stabilized on the inside of useState. Okay, so anyways, enjoy learning React, and I guess we'll see you around the internet.